Welcome to the Lava Fantasy Football League. This is the Week 15 recap. We are in the playoffs. This is the quarterfinal round, aka wild card, because a couple of the top teams were able to have buys, and I'm sure they are thankful that they got those buys. Very, very interesting week. The drink for today is Cali Cream and Cali Cream and Vanilla Ale. Vanilla Cream Ale. So this is from Mother Earth. I really like this beer. I think I showed it to you guys once before. Last season, perhaps. Always good. I'm gonna get a little bit of a Boilermaker. This is Applejack. I'm not gonna throw it in there. Okay, let's hit record on the OBS. So let's just take a look at the matchups. We can go with the consolation bracket. We'll just be really quick with this, and then we can talk about the interesting thing about how the matchups played out. This is me versus Mike. Pretty high scoring game. This is kind of the Detroit games that I was been banking on, and they finally had one. And this is the potential that they had. Jared Goff had 5 passing touchdowns. That ties his career high. Once he had with the Rams, this is one with the Lions. He had 33.52. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he had 112 receiving yards of receiving touchdown. Jahmyr Gibbs, 100 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown and a receiving touchdown. The all-purpose yards are all there. Sam Laporta, 3 receiving touchdowns. He is quickly climbing the boards in terms of like dynasty type of tight end. I think he's already earned it. Thankfully, we're not in a dynasty, so everyone's gonna have a shot at him next year. Jameson Williams, he actually had a really good game. The fantasy score doesn't really reflect it because he didn't have the touchdowns like he had early in the year, but he was an impact. Has some really nice plays, and I think the biggest thing was early in the game. They took 2 shots at him down the field, and that put the fear of God in Denver, and that just opened it up for everything else. Even though they didn't connect it, it really changed the impact of the game, in my opinion. Groupie was my kicker. I had a pretty good game from him, and the Atlanta D was okay. I wanted to swap him out, but there was kind of trash on waivers. Off the bench, nothing much here. I think George Pickens is one that I want to highlight in terms of like his value going down. There's a clip of him just not run blocking and him just standing there costing them a touchdown. Like if he just blocks a little bit, then perhaps Warren gets a touchdown, but I don't know. I'm so done with him. He has that diva thing where like he can make amazing catches, but when things aren't going right, it's the same thing that happens with all the diva receivers. Well, heartbreaking for Mitchell, tore his ACL, gruesome injury, and yeah, I had a really good score this week. This would have made me really competitive had I made the playoffs. Too bad. Same for Mike. Mike actually had a really good week. Russell Wilson did okay despite them getting beat down by Detroit. Devontae Adams had a big time game, 101 receiving yards, receiving touchdown. In their beatdown of the Chargers. Justin Jefferson, thankfully he came back and he balled out. This is a nice step for him. Kyron Williams again, like moving up the boards in terms of running back rankings. He had 152 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Singletary had a huge game. 121 rushing yards, 49 receiving yards. That's a big time. Nothing much else from his other guys off the bench. Minshew was okay. Maybe he gets another point, and Amari Cooper had a really good game. The other consolation bracket game was Richie versus Brad. For Richie, nothing much from I mean, okay game from Lamar Jackson, decent game from CeeDee Lamb, even though they got like humbled by Buffalo. Diggs was not a big part of that because it all went to Cook, right? We'll see him a little bit later. David Montgomery had an okay game. Most of the share went to some of the other weapons, but it was decent. Right? That floor is really good. Mixon had a solid game. McBride had a huge game. So here's another tight end, another young tight end, second year tight end, who is going to be an interesting. His stock has risen, and he's going to be drafted higher next year. James Conner had a solid game. They actually kept it kind of tight with San Francisco before San Francisco just like stepped on the gas and just pulled away. But that Connor McBride, they did pretty solid. Tyler Bass, not much, and the Cleveland D, really strong game. For Brad, he had a huge game. Brock Purdy, solid. He is the MVP frontrunner, but like he says, and I kind of agree with him, McCaffrey, I would give it to McCaffrey. Wilson didn't do too much. Again, that was part of that game where I said the Jets quit. Jordan Addison, huge game, and then he had that one like game-winning touchdown that knocked Philly off. Man, what a catch! And really, really pushing Brad to this 140-point total. I think he has the top score of the week. And that in spite of Bijan having a terrible game. Oh man, I don't know. So we were just praising Atlanta last week for like how well the weapons were doing. This week it wasn't that great, and they even lost. That may cost them like a playoff spot. Devon Achane is back and was doing okay. Mostert is actually the bell cow there, and Achane is kind of like the change of pace at this point. Dalton Schultz had an okay game, and here this is what we talked about. James Cook, younger brother of Dalvin Cook, balled out 179 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, a receiving touchdown. He even had another touchdown, possible touchdown that he just missed. And he's looking crazy. And they absolutely humbled Dallas. And that accounts for most of his points. Sanders had a solid kicking game also. Nice pickup. And then the San Francisco D did okay. Anything interesting off the bench? Not much for Richie. Deontay Johnson had a solid game, and then likely having another really good game for Baltimore. Zach Moss did okay, and Myers had a strong game too. Jacoby Myers had a good game. But again, like look at these scores, man. Can you imagine if these guys were in the playoffs? Now let's go to the actual playoff guys. We'll go to the one. This one, it was kind of close until it wasn't. And then in the end, I think it just boils down to Eric just not having enough. He just did not have enough. Look, this is one of the saddest scores, probably. Like Zay Flowers only having 1.2. That's who he was relying on Monday night. Najee Harris didn't do much. Jalen Warren on his bench actually outperformed him. Derrick Henry, also another disappointment, even though they were battling and actually went to overtime. It's just like, I don't know. Henry, he's maybe his like 1 foot out the door. He's probably no longer with Tennessee next year. But that is the like sharp fall that you see with running backs often. McKinnon, a solid pickup. He was part of a cool play where early on, and this kind of made it a little bit close, is when McKinnon had a trick play. McKinnon threw a touchdown pass to Rice, so he had that double score. Jake Moody had a solid game, and this was probably a big mishap, was choosing the Jets, who are a good defense. Problem is, like I said, if you watch the game, you can tell the team just quit. They were done. They're like, we're done. There's no point in playing anymore. McLaurin had a super solid game for him. That would have probably helped if he had played him instead. And then T. Higgins also with this beautiful catch on Thursday, helping them to knock off Minnesota. And it hurt because all of those would have helped him, and maybe, swap out Zay Flowers for T. Higgins. Swap out Jay Warren for Najee Harris. Maybe it helps. If you choose another defense, and maybe you have a chance to take this game. But it's really hard. We have a very, very thin waiver wire. So it's really, really hard. If your team doesn't have enough solid players, it's gonna just be hard. And it finally just caught up to Eric. For James, Tua didn't have much of a big game. That's kind of predicted because Hill was out. Cooper Cup had a solid game. AJ Brown was involved, but he was part of a game where they kind of like where the defense kind of like kept him in check. Rashad White had a solid game, 89 rushing yards, a receiving touchdown. Zach Charbonnet didn't do much. Conklin didn't do much. But again, yet another week of Deebo Samuel going off. Jason Myers, solid game, and then an excellent job with the Chicago D getting nearly 20 points. Off the bench, Jackson Smith and Jigma. Oh, I think I confused, right? I think the last game I said Addison had that big time catch. It was JSN. So ignore what I said earlier. JSN had the big time touchdown catch to knock off Philly. And then Palmer had a big time game for the Chargers, even though they got stomped on. He had 113 receiving yards. It was largely because he broke free and had this like 79-yard touchdown. Other than that, it's a pretty average game for him. But congrats to James. He moves on. He knocks off Eric. Congrats to Eric for making it this far. His team just wasn't strong enough. You can join the rest of us on the sidelines. And then our last game, we will talk about Darren versus Morgan. At first, this seemed like it was going to be like Morgan easily. But it wasn't. Darren made a game of it. And there's a possibility that Darren might have won this game had he played his cards right. Just didn't. Darren played Patrick Mahomes, who did okay. Tyler Lockett didn't do much, even though they pulled out that win. A lot of those points happened at the end of that drive, right? That final 2-minute drive. Big pass to DK, big pass to DK, big pass to DK, and then game-winning touchdown to Jackson Smith and Jigba. And then Tyler Lockett just was not a part of that. McCaffrey, though, made this more of a game. He accounts for like 3 players getting 2 receiving touchdowns, 115 rushing yards, and 72 receiving yards. And he just made this game super close. Chuba Hubbard, solid. Nice substitution there. Jake Ferguson had a decent game. And then here's a really smart pickup, getting Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who, because, Isaiah Pacheco was out, so this was actually a really smart play by Darren. Butker did okay, and then the Dallas D just let him down. So he actually made a game of this. Morgan had an okay Stafford game. Chase, unfortunately, got hurt. Drake London, again, a down game after a big game last week. Travis Etienne, a disappointing game. Most of his points came from Kamara doing well, and Njoku having a second consecutive big-time week, and then Kenneth Walker just gashing Philly. He's a big reason why I think they won that game. Kept them in the game. He kind of kept them in the game, and then Drew Lock was able to close it out with DK and JSN. Jake Elliott didn't do much, and a big-time smart play picking up the Las Vegas D because they just took the hearts out of the Chargers. And the Chargers coach got fired as a result. Off the bench, nothing much for Morgan, but the big key is Godwin for Darren. Had he played Godwin in place of Lockett or Shaheed, Darren wins this game. So it's just a tough break. Finally benched him, and then Godwin finally had a good game. Because Godwin was kind of letting him down the previous weeks, and he finally benches him. And then the 1 week where he benched him, he goes off. This would have got Darren the win. So it was certainly interesting because this looked like it was an easy win for Morgan, but it wasn't. It totally wasn't. So congrats to Morgan moving on. Good job, Darren, making it this far, but you can sit on the bench with the rest of us. So what does that mean going forward? The winner of this match, I think James plays... Let's actually look at it. Morgan plays Mike. James plays Jeremy. Interestingly enough, though, let's look at what the other guys did. Start with Gary. His team didn't do much. He obviously didn't bother fixing his team. Mayfield had the big time game, and Howell I think Howell is he probably has a dead arm as much as he's been throwing. Jalen Waddle was the big story though because they benched Tyreek Hill and preserve the guy, preserve Tyreek Hill. Jalen Waddle steps in the role and just goes off. Gary didn't have much from anybody else off the bench. Mayfield had a perfect game in Lambeau Field, and Curtis Samuel had a big time game as well. But just take note of like Waddle because that's going to impact what can possibly happen in the future. The other one is Aaron, barely a pulse. His team, Justin Fields again doesn't do much, and then Stroud is out. They had a really incredible game where Justin Fields threw a Hail Mary to, I think, Mooney, and Mooney was on the ground on his butt. He had the ball that would have won the game-winning touchdown, but he bobbled it up, and it ended up being intercepted. And that cost another 6 points. I would have gave Justin Fields 60. Mike Evans had a solid game. Jaden Reed also a solid game. Not much from the other guys. And a bunch of zeros here. And Jordan Love actually had a better game. What Aaron can take solace in is, like, I don't think his team would have performed that well had he made the playoffs either. But, I mean, he probably would have done a better job than Eric did. The other ones, though, that are really interesting is look at our top two contenders. Granted, they don't adjust the team, but take a look at what, like, Mike's team, the Week 15 scores. Jalen Hurts actually had a decent game. This is mostly buoyed by, like, a tush-push touchdown, a couple of them. He has not been performing well. Devontae Smith didn't do well. DJ Moore didn't do well. Saquon Barkley didn't do well. Hawkinson, solid. Ty Chandler, big-time game. Courtland Sutton had an okay game. Off the bench, his best player was Gus Edwards. Nothing much from Hunt. Cole Kmet had a decent game, slightly better than Hawkinson, but that netted him like not much in terms of a final score. And even more glaring is take a look at Jeremy's team. This is sad. Week 15 score. Look at this. This is not the 140 average that we've been seeing from Jeremy. So very, very concerning. Going into his first playoff game, Josh Allen played well, but it doesn't reflect here. Keenan Allen, questionable. Tyreek Hill, they obviously benched. Raheem Mostert was their best. DeAndre Swift has been kind of slightly coming back down to earth. Ingram, not that great of a game. DK Metcalf, this was saved. This score is mostly in the last 2 minutes of a game. Isaiah Pacheco out. Geno Smith out. Jamal Williams not doing nothing. DeAndre Hopkins not doing much. Gabe Davis nothing. So, fortunate for Jeremy, this was a bye week, and hopefully he can get back to normal. But, I don't know. Any of these are possible trends that can continue next week. And that makes it very, very difficult for Jeremy. He was dominating through the regular season, but here at the end of the season, here in the playoffs, what are they going to do with Tyreek Hill? Is he going to try to chase the record? I think that's what Jeremy's hoping for. Or are they going to try to preserve him for the playoffs? The worst thing happened is that they won big time against the Jets. Jalen Waddle was fine. And so that can be an indicator for like Tyreek Hill to be like, hey, just take it easy. We need you for the playoffs. Get your body right. Get healthy. And then that just hurts for the fantasy. From a fantasy perspective, needs to have like guys get healthy and get back. Josh Allen is a positive. This fantasy score isn't too encouraging, but they are fighting for their playoff lives. Mostert is pretty solid. DeAndre Swift, they're gonna definitely want to get back right. Pacheco, is he gonna be healthy next week? They're also fighting for playoff seeding. It's really, really interesting. The best thing about his team was his Miami D, and even that might be inflated because, like I said, the Jets quit. So very, very concerning. Interestingly enough, like had this been an 8-team playoff, like I think I've had that in previous years, both our top 2 seeds probably would have been eliminated because who's our next two? It was like me and I don't know. It could have, just saying, right? Like the consolation bracket scores were much higher in aggregate than the championship bracket, so this could have been a much different outcome. But anyways, we are on to the semifinals. Like we said, Brownsville Jets plays Morgan versus Mike B. And then James versus Jeremy, who looked like he was gonna roll to a title, but I don't know, kind of questionable. Hopefully his team can get back on track. This is an interesting matchup because it's a matchup of never won before. Morgan and James never won before, but both Jeremy and Mikey are former title winners, so we'll see. So next week is the semifinals.